The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the streets still glistened under the pale orange glow of streetlights, each puddle reflecting fragments of neon signs and distant windows. The city at this hour belonged to no one. Empty sidewalks, shuttered storefronts, and the occasional passing car that disappeared as quickly as it came. Maya walked slowly, her hand resting against the curve of her belly, feeling the gentle movements within that reminded her she was not entirely alone. Her heels had stopped clicking 15 minutes ago when she'd removed them, carrying them by the straps because her feet had swollen past bearing them any longer. The cold pavement numbed her soles, but at least the sharp pain had stopped. She had nowhere to go. The thought wasn't new. It had been circling in her mind for 3 days now, ever since she'd found her apartment locks changed and her belongings in bags on the curb. 3 days of kindness from strangers, a shelter bed here, a meal from a concerned waitress there, but nothing that could last. Nothing that felt like safety. At 7 months pregnant, she had learned that the world was not built for women in her position. Doors that should have opened remained firmly closed. Faces that should have softened turned away instead. And so she walked, because walking felt better than sitting still and letting despair catch up with her. She paused beneath the awning of a closed bakery, her breath forming small clouds in the cold night air. Through the dark window, she could see the shapes of tomorrow's pastries already laid out, waiting for morning. Her stomach reminded her that she hadn't eaten since noon. "You shouldn't be out here." The voice came from the shadows to her left, deep and soft, carrying no threat in its tone, only observation. Maya turned, her hand instinctively pressing more firmly against her belly, ready to run if she needed to. A man stepped forward into the edge of the streetlight's reach. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat that seemed expensive without being flashy, his features sharp but not harsh. His eyes caught her attention most, pale grey, almost silver, holding a strange stillness that she couldn't name. "I could say the same to you," as she replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. The faintest hint of a smile crossed his face. "I belong to the night. You do not." There was something in how he said it, something old and certain, that made her believe him without understanding why. He took another step forward, and she noticed he moved without sound, his expensive shoes making no noise on the wet pavement. "When did you last eat?" he asked. The question surprised her. She'd expected judgment, perhaps, or false concern that would evaporate the moment it was tested. Not this direct, practical inquiry. "This afternoon," she admitted. "Someone bought me lunch." He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, not with desire or calculation, but with something closer to recognition. As if he saw in her a story he understood, though they'd never met. "I have a home," he said finally. "It's warm. There's food. You may stay until you find somewhere better." Maya laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know cold. I know hunger. And I know what it is to have nowhere to go when the night is long." He paused. My name is Adrian. I am offering you shelter, nothing more. You may leave whenever you wish. Something in his voice made her believe him. Maybe it was exhaustion clouding her judgment, or maybe it was something deeper, an instinct that had kept her alive through harder times than this. She studied his face, searching for the lie, the hidden agenda, the trap. She found nothing but patience. Okay, she heard herself say. Just for tonight. Adrian's home was not what she'd expected. She'd imagined something modest, perhaps, or else something garish, the extremes that men who approached women on dark streets tended to occupy. Instead, she found herself in a penthouse that whispered of centuries rather than decades, filled with books and art and furniture that seemed to have witnessed history firsthand. The warmth hit her immediately as she stepped inside, her chilled body drinking it in gratefully. Adrian moved past her, disappearing into what she assumed was the kitchen, while she stood in the entryway and tried to make sense of her surroundings. Tall windows overlooked the city, offering a view that made the streets below seem almost peaceful. Candles flickered on various surfaces, though she noticed the soft glow of modern lighting as well. The walls held paintings she didn't recognize but suspected were valuable, not because they seemed expensive, but because they seemed important. Loved. Sit. Adrian called from the kitchen. You've been on your feet too long. She wanted to argue, to maintain some pretense of independence, but her body made the decision for her. She sank into a leather chair that seemed to embrace her weight, feeling months of tension begin to loosen its grip on her shoulders. He returned with a tray, soup, warm bread, a glass of water, and sliced fruit arranged with a care that surprised her. He set it on the table beside her chair and then retreated to the far side of the room, settling into his own seat near the window, watching the city below rather than watching her eat. The food was simple but perfect, and she realized she'd been hungrier than she'd admitted to herself. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, while the silence between them stretched without becoming uncomfortable. You're wondering what I am, Adrian said finally, still not looking at her. Meyer paused mid-bite. I'm wondering why you helped me. That's not the same question. He turned then, and in the candlelight, his pale eyes seemed to glow faintly. But I'll answer both. What I am is old. Older than this city, older than the country that built it. I've lived long enough to understand that kindness costs less than cruelty, though the world rarely agrees. She should have been afraid. The way he spoke, the strange stillness of his features, the way he seemed to exist slightly outside the normal flow of time, all of it should have sent her running for the door. But her feet were warm for the first time in days, and the baby inside her had grown calm, and something in Adrian's voice held no threat. And why did you help me? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Because I remember what it was to be alone in the dark, long ago. Because no one helped me then. And it took me centuries to understand that I should have been helped. Because the life you carry deserves more than cold pavement and closed doors. Meyer's hand moved to her belly again. You could see? I can sense life, he said simply. New life, especially. It burns brighter than anything else in this world. She stayed for one night, and then another, and then a week passed without either of them mentioning the word leaving. Adrian asked for nothing from her except that she rest, eat, and let her body prepare for what was coming. He gave her a room with a bed softer than any she'd known, stocked with books and blankets and a window that caught the morning sun. During the days, he slept, or disappeared, she wasn't sure which, and she wandered through his home, learning its secrets slowly. The ancient texts in languages she couldn't read. The paintings that, she eventually realized, showed the same man across different centuries, his face unchanged while the world transformed around him. The collection of letters, faded and fragile, from people whose names meant nothing to her but clearly meant everything to him. She understood, gradually, that he was not human. The understanding came not with fear but with a strange peace. Whatever he was, he had chosen to protect her. That choice mattered more than the nature of the one who made it. In the evenings, when the sun set and Adrian emerged, they would talk. She told him about the father of her child, a man who had seemed kind until kindness became inconvenient, who had promised forever until forever arrived and he decided he wasn't ready. She told him about her family, scattered and distant, unwilling to help a daughter who had made choices they didn't approve of. She told him about her dreams, slowly being revised downward with each passing month, until all that remained was the hope that she could give her child something better than what she'd been given. Adrian listened without judgment. He asked questions that showed he understood the weight of her words, and when she cried, which happened more often than she would have liked, he didn't try to comfort her with false promises or empty platitudes. He simply waited, patient as centuries, until the storm passed and she could breathe again. In return, he told her about himself, though the stories came slowly, offered like gifts rather than explanations. He spoke of what it meant to watch the world change while remaining unchanged, to see empires rise and fall like seasons, to love humans knowing they would age and die while he continued on. He spoke of the hunger that had once defined him, the need for blood, the predator's instinct, and how he had learned, over centuries, to satisfy it without harm. Willing donors, medical supplies, alternatives that modern technology had made possible. I have not hurt anyone in a very long time, he said one evening, watching the fire he'd lit for her comfort. It was not always so. I carry those years with me, the ones where I was cruel because I did not know how to be otherwise. But time teaches, if you let it. And now? Meyer asked. He considered the question. Now I try to balance the scales. Small kindnesses where I can offer them. Protection for those who need it. It will never be enough to erase what I was, but perhaps it is enough to matter. The months passed, and Meyer's body changed, and Adrian adapted to her needs with a thoughtfulness that surprised her every time she noticed it. He learned which foods settled her stomach and which made the nausea worse. He adjusted the temperature of her room based on nothing more than observing whether she reached for blankets or pushed them away. He stocked his home with books about pregnancy and childbirth, reading them at night and then quietly implementing what he'd learned. He found her a doctor, a woman named Dr. Okonkwo, who asked no questions about Maya's living situation and provided careful, compassionate care. Adrian paid for everything, refusing Maya's protests with a simple observation. I have accumulated more wealth than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Let it do something worthwhile. As her due date approached, Maya began to understand the full weight of what Adrian had given her. Not just shelter and food, though those had saved her life. Not just safety, though she slept better in his home than she had anywhere else. He had given her dignity, the chance to prepare for her child's arrival without desperation clouding every moment, without the grinding fear of homelessness shadowing every thought. "What will you do?" she asked one evening, "when I leave?" Adrian looked up from the book he was reading, something ancient, the pages yellowed and fragile. "Continue as I have. The city has many who need help, though few will accept it." "Will you be lonely?" The question seemed to surprise him. He set the book down carefully, considering. "I have been lonely for a very long time, Maya. Long enough that I no longer recognize it as unusual. But these months with you..." He paused, searching for words. "I had forgotten what it was like to share a home with someone. To hear another heartbeat in these rooms. To care about someone's day, their worries, their small victories." He met her eyes, and she saw something vulnerable in his ancient gaze, something that centuries had failed to extinguish entirely. "You have reminded me why I continue," he said quietly. "Why the endless years are worth enduring. So whatever loneliness comes after, it will be balanced by the memory of this time." The baby came on a night in early spring, when the trees outside Adrian's windows had just begun to show their first green buds. Maya woke with a gasp, feeling the first true contractions, and found Adrian already at her door, somehow sensing the change before she'd made a sound. He drove her to the hospital himself, maintaining the careful speed limit while her body worked through its ancient rhythms. He stayed with her through the long hours that followed, a steady presence at her side, fetching ice chips and holding her hand and reminding her to breathe when the pain made her forget. Dr. Okonkwo arrived near dawn, and as the sun began to rise over the city, Maya's daughter entered the world, crying and red-faced and absolutely perfect. "She's beautiful," Adrian said, his voice rough with something that might have been emotion. He stood at a careful distance, giving Maya space with her child, but his eyes never left the small bundle in her arms. "Would you like to hold her?" Maya asked. For a moment, he hesitated. "I don't know if I should." "I'm not." "You're the reason she's alive," Maya interrupted gently. "The reason I was healthy enough to carry her. The reason she's being born in a warm hospital instead of a cold street. You should hold her." He approached slowly, his movements more careful than she'd ever seen them. When she placed the baby in his arms, something shifted in his face, a softening, as if walls built over centuries had suddenly developed cracks. "Hello," he murmured to the infant, who had quieted and was watching him with the unfocused curiosity of the newly born. "Welcome to the world." It is complicated and often unkind, but there is beauty in it too. I promise you that much. Meyer watched him, this ancient creature cradling her daughter, and understood that he had given her more than shelter. He had given her hope, not the desperate hope she'd clung to in her darkest moments, but something steadier and truer. The kind of hope that comes from witnessing goodness in an unexpected place. She named the baby Alara, after a moon of Jupiter, something distant and lovely that Adrian had told her about one evening when she'd asked about the stars. The moons of Jupiter have always fascinated me, Ahid said. So far from the sun, yet each with its own story. Some of ice, some of fire. All of them circling something vast and powerful, but maintaining their own parts nonetheless. It seemed right, somehow. A name that carried the echo of their strange friendship without explaining it entirely. In the weeks that followed, Maya recovered her strength in Adrian's home, learning the rhythms of new motherhood while he maintained his careful distance. He was always available when she needed help, but never intrusive. He held Alara when Maya needed rest, pacing the penthouse at night with the baby against his chest, humming songs in languages that had been dead for centuries. Eventually, the time came to leave. Maya had found a job, remote work that would let her care for Alara while building a new life. She'd found an apartment, modest but safe, in a neighborhood where other young mothers smiled at her on the street. She had resources now, savings Adrian had insisted she accept, contacts who could help her navigate the challenges ahead. On her last night in the penthouse, she stood by the window where Adrian so often watched the city, Alara sleeping in her arms. "I don't know how to thank you," Ishi said. Adrian stood beside her, his reflection barely visible in the glass. "You don't need to. This is what I should have been doing all along, using what I have to help those who need it. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything. You taught me that I was still capable of caring." He turned to look at her, and his ancient eyes held something that might have been peace. I had convinced myself, over the centuries, that I was beyond connection. That I had lost the ability to feel as humans feel. You proved me wrong. Maya smiled, though tears were gathering in her eyes. You're going to be alone again. No, he said gently. I'm going to be changed. And I'm going to continue the work that your presence began. There are others out there, walking cold streets at midnight, carrying burdens too heavy for one person. I'm going to find them. She nodded, believing him. Will I see you again? When Alara takes her first steps. When she starts school. When she needs someone to watch over her that isn't her mother. He paused. I will be watching, Maya. Not intrusively, only when you need me. But I will be there. Like a guardian angel? He smiled, and the expression made him look almost human. Something like that. Though angels, I suspect, have less complicated histories. Maya left the next morning, stepping into a world that seemed brighter somehow, less frightening. Alara stirred in her car seat as the taxi pulled away from Adrian's building, and Meyer looked back to see a figure in an upper window, just a silhouette, watching until they turned the corner and disappeared from view. She didn't know exactly what Adrian was. She'd never asked directly, sensing that the answer mattered less than the actions that had accompanied it. But she knew what he had done for her, offered shelter without conditions, protection without expectation, kindness without limit. In his centuries of existence, Adrian had likely seen countless sunrises and sunsets, watched generations live and die, witnessed the endless cycle of human struggle and triumph. But in those quiet months with Meyer, something had shifted within him, not the dramatic transformation of stories and legends, but something gentler. A reawakening. A reminder of why he had chosen, so long ago, to use his power for protection rather than predation. His heart had not been lost in the way the world might assume. It had been found, rediscovered in the simple act of caring for someone who needed it, of watching new life enter the world and knowing he had helped make it possible. As Meyer's taxi disappeared into the morning traffic, Adrian remained at the window, watching the city come alive around him. Somewhere out there, others walked alone through their own dark nights, carrying their own impossible burdens. He had forever. He would find them. And in finding them, he would continue to find himself, the part of him that centuries had buried but never destroyed, the part that could still feel the warmth of connection, the quiet joy of purpose, the humble grace of being needed by someone who might otherwise have been lost. The sun rose higher, casting golden light across the buildings of the city, and Adrian finally stepped back from the window. There was rest to be had before nightfall, and then the work would continue. Not the work of survival, which had occupied him for so long, but the work of meaning, the slow, patient effort of making his endless existence matter. Meyer had given him that. A pregnant woman alone on a cold street, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to, had reminded an ancient creature what it meant to be truly alive. And for that gift, he would spend the rest of his eternity trying to repay her, not to her directly, but to the world that had almost forgotten her, one small kindness at a time.